That is a wrap on another NHL trade deadline, and what a deadline it was. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's not waste any time and start things off with some trades that actually happened last night that I haven't talked about yet on the channel. First up, the New York Rangers have acquired defenseman Carson Soucy from the Vancouver Canucks in exchange for a 2025 third-round draft pick. If you're Vancouver, moving on from Carson Soucy makes sense. He became expendable once they went out and traded for Marcus Pettersson, and when it comes to the New York Rangers, they've done a bit of buying and selling at the deadline this year. It makes sense that they wanted to go out and get a little bit of help on the left side after trading Ryan Lindgren to Colorado. Soucy is still signed through next season at a cap hit of $3.25 million. He's big, solid defensively, decent addition here for the New York Rangers. I could see him being pretty effective for them in a shutdown role. Next up, the Minnesota Wild acquired Justin Brazeau from the Boston Bruins in exchange for Murat Huznadinov, Jacob Lauko, and a 2026 sixth-round draft pick. Solid addition here for Minnesota. Justin Brazeau is a pretty effective bottom six power forward. He's got some finishing touch. He has 10 goals this season in 57 games. He's somebody that can play net front on the power play. And when it comes to the Boston Bruins, this is definitely not the only time we're going to talk about them in this video. They picked a direction, and that direction is to retool. They get a couple of young forwards here in Huznadinov and Lauko for a player in Justin Brazeau who's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. Lauko is a player the Bruins are obviously familiar with. They drafted him. He played parts of 2 seasons with the Bruins already, so the Bruins get a bit younger here and get an additional late round draft pick. This is a fine deal for them. Moving on now to one of the bigger trades that went down. This one actually happened very late last night. The Colorado Avalanche have acquired Brock Nelson along with William Dufour from the New York Islanders in exchange for prospect Callum Ritchie, defenseman Oliver Shillington, a conditional 2026 first-round draft pick, and a conditional 2028 third-round pick. I feel the same way about this trade as I did about the Tampa Bay Lightning going out and trading 2 first-round draft picks for Yanni Gordon, Oliver Bjorkstrand. Is this a lot to give up for Brock Nelson? Yes. Does that make it a bad trade for Colorado? Absolutely not. This is a huge addition for them. They finally have a legit number 2 center, really for the first time since Nazem Kadri left. So they address their biggest need by making this trade. The Avalanche are much deeper down the middle today than they were yesterday. And for the Islanders, I mean, this is a no-brainer. A first-round draft pick and Colorado's best prospect in Callum Ritchie, who is probably a, top 20 prospect in the entire NHL? You add him to a prospect pool that already includes the likes of Danny Nelson and Cole Yzerman, on top of the fact that the Islanders now have 4 first-round draft picks in the next 3 drafts. The Islanders' future is not looking near as bleak as it did a few years ago. After making this trade, the Islanders flipped defenseman Oliver Shillington to the Anaheim Ducks for future considerations, so a bit of added depth for the Ducks on the blue line for the remainder of the season. They could use it after trading away Brian Dumoulin. Oh man, this next trade had me in my feels a little bit. The Edmonton Oilers have acquired defenseman Jake Wallman from the San Jose Sharks in exchange for Carl Berglund and a conditional 2026 first-round draft pick. The condition on that first-round pick is if the selection is in the top 12, Edmonton may choose to transfer their 2027 first-rounder to San Jose instead. Should Edmonton choose to trade their 2027 first-rounder prior to the 2026 trade deadline, their 2026 first-round selection will transfer to San Jose unconditionally. Jake Wallman had been fantastic for San Jose this season, really as their number 1 defenseman. I'm sure they would have loved to hold on to him as he's still signed through next season, but just from an asset management standpoint, this was too good of an opportunity for the San Jose Sharks to pass up. As I'm sure all of you remember, Detroit traded Jake Wallman to San Jose along with a second-round draft pick for future considerations. So in the end, San Jose ended up turning future considerations into a second-round draft pick, 50 games of Jake Wallman being their best defenseman, and now a first-round pick. More salt on the wound for Red Wings fans. The decision to trade a second to offload Jake Wallman's contract was a head-scratcher at the time, and it looks even worse now. And for the Oilers, the fit of Jake Wallman is a bit questionable. He's not really the lockdown defensive force that a lot of people thought they were going to go out and trade for, but he definitely still improves their blue line. Edmonton is a skilled offensive team. They like to play with the puck. Jake Wallman is a good puck mover, fantastic skater, and has an absolute cannon of a shot from the point. He's also pretty versatile in the sense that he can play the left or right side, and it's not like Edmonton is asking him to come in and be their number 1 defenseman and play 23 plus minutes a night. I think Wallman is going to thrive on the Oilers in a second pairing role, and he's still signed through next season as well at a very reasonable cap hit of just $3.4 million, which is huge. This next one surprised me a little bit. The Washington Capitals have acquired acquired Anthony Beauvillier from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a 2025 second-round pick. This trade really just hammered home how much of a seller's market it was at this year's deadline. At the end of the day, Washington did have an extra second-round draft pick, and Beauvillier should be a decent bottom six add for them. He's got some skill and finishing touch. He has 13 goals this season in 63 games. He scored 20 in the past. Great asset management here by the Penguins, getting a second-round draft pick for a guy you signed to a one-year deal in the offseason. Even though the Penguins didn't end up trading Rickard Rakell, I still think as a whole they had a pretty good deadline. Next up, the Philadelphia Flyers acquired a 2027 third-round draft pick in exchange for Andrei Kuzmenko and a seventh-rounder in 2025. Philadelphia is also retaining 50% on Kuzmenko as part of this deal, so Kuzmenko is now traded for a second time this season. Figured Philadelphia would probably look to flip him at some point. I really thought the Kings were going to make a big splash at this year's deadline. They didn't. This was their biggest move. I don't hate it. It's a low-risk, high-reward move. They didn't really have to give up much to bring Kuzmenko in. When you think about it, he's really not all that far removed from a 39-goal season. His finishing obviously hasn't been there this season, but who knows? Maybe he can find a groove in LA, get that finishing touch back, and provide them with some much-needed scoring. In the end, though, I don't really think this is a move that's going to move the needle all that much for the Kings. And seeing all the moves some other Western Conference contenders made at the deadline this year, I don't have a whole lot of faith in the Kings' ability to go deep in the playoffs this year. Moving on now to one of the biggest trades that happened at the deadline this year, the Ottawa Senators have acquired Dylan Cousins along with Dennis Gilbert and a 2026 second-round draft pick from the Buffalo Sabres. In exchange, Buffalo is receiving Jacob Bernard-Docker and Josh Norris. I believe on the Sportsnet broadcast they said this is the first time in NHL history that two players with a cap hit north of $7 million have been traded for each other on deadline day, which is pretty crazy. Honestly, I like this trade for both teams. Dylan Cousins obviously has struggled to live up to his contract in Buffalo. He's definitely a player that I think is going to benefit from a change of scenery, and I think you can say the same thing for Josh Norris. Obviously, Norris's case is a little bit different. The big reason he hasn't lived up to his contract is because he's struggled to stay healthy, but when Josh Norris has been in the lineup for the Ottawa Senators over the last few seasons, for the most part, he's been a very efficient goal scorer. I will say I think Dylan Cousins has a higher ceiling than Josh Norris, but obviously Buffalo is not only getting Josh Norris here, they're also getting a young right shot defenseman in Jacob Bernard-Docker. Obviously, the Buffalo Sabres have a slew of talented left shot defensemen, so I think they could use a guy like Jacob Bernard-Docker on the right side who has really yet to break out. Maybe a change of scenery can help him do that. Overall, a really fun trade and one that I think both fan bases can be excited about. Next up, the Winnipeg Jets went out and acquired defenseman Luke Schenn from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a 2026 second round pick and a 2027 fourth. So in the end, Pittsburgh does decide to flip Luke Schenn after acquiring him from Nashville as part of the Michael Bunting trade. And I won't lie, I think Pittsburgh did a lot better here than I thought they were going to. If they decided to flip Luke Schenn, I figured at best they'd get a third or fourth round pick. So a really solid return for them. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, even though they didn't trade Rakell, I still think Pittsburgh did pretty well at this trade deadline as a whole. Not a huge fan of this trade for the Jets. Obviously, you can never have enough depth on the back end, and Luke Schenn is a guy who brings playoff experience. He's physical, decent defensively still at this point in his career, but is he really that much of an upgrade over somebody like Colin Miller on their third pairing? I don't really think so. The Jets also went out and traded another second round draft pick for Brandon Tanev, and again, yes, it's added depth, and it's a player the organization is obviously very familiar with. Brandon Tanev spent the early years of his career in Winnipeg. Should be a seamless transition. Tanev is the kind of player that you can just plug into the lineup and you know what you're going to get. He's quick, he's pesky, he forechecks really well, but it's another move that I really just don't think moves the needle all that much, if at all, for the Jets. And seeing the kinds of moves that other contenders in the Jets division made, I would be a little bit concerned if I was a Jets fan. Moving on now to the next trade, the Detroit Red Wings have acquired goaltender Peter Mrazek along with forward Craig Smith in exchange for Joe Veleno. If you follow me on Twitter, you already know how I feel about this. A bit of a head scratcher here, in my opinion. I don't mind them moving on from Joe Veleno. I think he is what he is at this point in his career. He is a low-event defensive center. I think Craig Smith is an upgrade over him for the remainder of the season. Craig Smith is scoring at an 18-goal pace this season. The Red Wings could definitely use some goals, but taking on the Mrazek contract, I'm not a huge fan of that move. There's no salary retention as part of this deal, so the Red Wings are taking on the full $4.25 million cap hit of Peter Peter Mrazek, and he signed at that number through next season. So the Red Wings crease is pretty crowded for the remainder of the season. Alex Lyon is a pending UFA, so at the very least, this trade gives the Red Wings some certainty on what their goaltending situation is going to be like heading into next season. But again, just don't love Peter Mrazek at $4.25 million. I would have rather the Red Wings just go out and sign a cheap backup in the offseason to a one-year deal, or bring back Alex Lyon on a cheap one-year deal. Next up, the Colorado Avalanche went out and traded for another centerman. They have acquired Charlie Coyle from the Boston Bruins along with a 2026 fifth-round draft pick. In exchange, Boston is receiving Casey Middlestat, a second-rounder in 2025, and unsigned prospect William Zellers. Casey Middlestat really just didn't work out in Colorado. He struggled to live up to his contract this season, so it's no surprise that the Avalanche went out and decided to move on from Middlestat and bring in a center in Charlie Coyle, who's a veteran, brings a bit more physicality, is a bit better defensively. I imagine Colorado probably plans on playing him in a shutdown role, and I won't lie, a 1-2-3 down the middle of McKinnon, Nelson, and Coyle sounds pretty damn good. And for the Bruins, I really like the fact that they decided to go all in with this retool and not half-ass it, get younger, stockpile some draft picks, build for the future. This season is pretty much over for them. They're likely not going to make the playoffs. I definitely think a player like Casey Middlestat is worth taking a chance on for a team like Boston. He's still only 26 years old, and prior to this season, he had back-to-back 55-plus point seasons. Next up, the Columbus Blue Jackets have acquired Luke Kunin from San Jose for a 2025 fourth-round pick. Depth addition here for the Blue Jackets. Luke Kunin has 11 goals this season in 63 games, has a physical element to his game as well. Don't hate Columbus giving up a fourth-round pick for him, especially when guys like Beauvillier and Brian Antanev went for second-round picks. Next up, Utah has acquired a 2026 fifth-round draft pick from Chicago for Shea Weber, Aku Rati, and the rights to Victor Soderstrom. So Shea Weber's contract continues to get moved around. Utah clears up a little bit of cap space for next season, whereas Chicago gets a little something to help them hit the cap floor next season. I'm interested to see if Chicago will look to bring Soderstrom back to the NHL. He was an 11th overall selection by the Coyotes in 2019. The offensive talent is there. He's having a great season in the SHL with 36 points in 47 games. Next up, the Avalanche have acquired defenseman Eric Johnson from Philly in exchange for Giovanni Smith. So the Avalanche get a bit more depth on their blue line and some injury insurance. To me, this one really screams Philly doing Eric Johnson a solid and sending him to a team where he has a chance to compete for another Stanley Cup. I'm sure all the Avalanche players who were a part of the team that won the Stanley Cup in 2022 are going to be thrilled to have Eric Johnson back in the locker room. Next up, the Buffalo Sabres have acquired Eric Brandstrom, and they are sending Nicholas Aube-Kubel to the New York Rangers. So Brandstrom continues to bounce around the league a little bit. Not really a whole lot to break down here. These two are both fringe NHLers. Brandstrom is still only 25, and he's an RFA at the end of the season. He's got some offensive talent, just hasn't really been able to put it all together at the NHL level. Maybe Buffalo thinks they can get some use out of him. Next up, the Toronto Maple Leafs have acquired Scott Laughton from the Philadelphia Flyers, along with a fourth rounder in 2025 and a sixth rounder in 2027, in exchange for a conditional 2027 first round pick and Nikita Grabenkin. Philadelphia is also retaining 50% on Scott Laughton, and the condition on that 2027 first rounder is that it is top 10 protected. So the Leafs get their third line center. This is one of the few trade deadline predictions that I actually got right, them going out and trading for Scott Laughton. Should be a good fit. I think he's going to be very valuable for the Leafs, especially come playoff time. He's physical, he plays with an edge, and can chip in some offense. He's got 11 goals this season in 60 games. He had 18 back in the 2022-23 season. He's not just a rental either. He's still signed through next season, and with the salary retention, his cap hit is only $1.5 million, which is huge for the Leafs. I honestly think this is a much better move for the Leafs than if they would have went out and traded for Braden Shen. The reported asking price for Braden Shen was absurd. And for Philadelphia, obviously they're going to miss Scott Laughton. He has been an important player for them for a long time, a locker room leader, but in the end, Philly is a team that is still trying to build for the future, and now they have 6 first-round draft picks in the next 3 drafts, which is insane, as well as 4 second-rounders in the upcoming draft. Next up, the Islanders have acquired Adam Beckman from the Devils for Dennis Cholowski, similar to what I said about the Eric Brandstrom trade. Not really a whole lot to break down here. This is a minor league swap, although due to injuries, Dennis Cholowski actually has played quite a few games in the NHL this season and actually gave the Islanders pretty decent minutes. Moving on now to the biggest trade of the day, the Dallas Stars have acquired Mikko Rantanen from the Carolina Hurricanes in exchange for Logan Stankoven, 2 first-round picks and 2 third-round picks. This was a sign-and-trade. Mikko Rantanen has agreed to an 8-year extension with with the Dallas Stars at a cap hit of $12 million per season. So I was definitely wrong about this whole Mikko Rantanen situation. If you've been watching my videos over the last few weeks, you would know that I didn't think it made sense for Carolina to flip Mikko Rantanen, and in the end I didn't think they were going to, especially if they were just going to trade him as a rental, potentially to an Eastern Conference contender, a team that they could end up playing in the playoffs. Thankfully they didn't do that. They sent him back out west, and again, this was a sign and trade, which made it worthwhile for Carolina. They got a much better return than what they would have gotten if they traded him as a rental. Does this trade make the Hurricanes a better team right now? No. Does this trade improve Carolina's chances at winning a Stanley Cup this year? No. But just from an asset management standpoint, this is definitely not a bad move by the Hurricanes. The way I'm looking at this for Carolina is we all expected them to trade Martin Necas in the summer when he was an RFA before he really popped off this season and increased his value. At that time, if you were to tell me that Carolina would end up getting multiple first-round draft picks and Logan Stankoven for Martin Necas, I would have said you were out of your mind. Stankoven may be a bit undersized, but he makes up for it with his compete level. He's not afraid to go to the dirty areas. Fantastic playmaker, somebody that I think has the potential to be a perennial 50-assist guy. He's already a very effective player at 22 years old. He's only going to get better. So again, even though I don't think this trade improves Carolina's odds at winning the Stanley Cup this season, this whole Martin Necas trade tree didn't end up working out too bad for them. And the Hurricanes can always look to flip these first-round draft picks they got from Dallas. Obviously, not this season because the trade deadline has passed. But in the offseason, they're definitely going to have the kind of assets to go out and make a big move or two to really bolster the lineup. I'd honestly be shocked if they don't end up trading at least one of these first-round draft picks they got from Dallas at some point. And shifting focus now and talking about this trade from the Dallas Stars' point of view, in my opinion, this is a home run for them. You land a superstar forward, not just for the rest of this season and the playoffs, but for the next 8 seasons after this. And you didn't have to give up your best young forward in Wyatt Johnston or your best young defenseman in Thomas Harley. On paper, the Dallas Stars' top 9 is absolutely insane. Jason Robertson, Rope Hintz, Mikko Rantanen, Marchment, Duchesne, Granlund, Ben, Johnston, Dadonov, and that's not even factoring in Tyler Seguin, who's going to return for the postseason. The Western Conference side of the playoffs is going to be an absolute bloodbath, and I cannot wait for it. Continuing on now, the New Jersey Devils have acquired Cody Glass and Jonathan Gruden from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Chase Stillman, Max Graham, and a third-round draft pick in 2027. The Penguins free up some cap space here and get another draft pick, and we knew the Devils were in the market for a center, especially with Jack Hughes out for the remainder of the season. They could definitely use a bit more depth at the position for the remainder of the season. And Cody Glass is an RFA at the end of the season, so if it's a good fit, the Devils have team control and they could keep him around beyond this season if they want to. Next up, the Hurricanes have acquired Mark Jankowski from the Predators for a 2026 fifth-round pick. Jankowski is a solid defensive fourth liner. He can kill some penalties, and he's very cheap as well, a cap hit of just $800K, and he's signed at that number through next season. Similar to what I said about Columbus giving up a fourth for Luke Cunnin. Don't hate Carolina giving up a fifth here for Jankowski when guys like Tanev and Beauvillier went for seconds. Next up, the New Jersey Devils have acquired Daniel Sprong from Seattle in exchange for a 2026 seventh-round pick. I mean, why not if you're New Jersey? They're obviously going to be looking for some more offense with Jack Hughes out of the lineup. Obviously, this season has been really rough for Daniel Sprong, but we know he's capable of being a really productive offensive player in limited minutes. He had 18 goals and 40-plus points for the Red Wings just last season. Next up, the Boston Bruins have acquired defenseman Henry Jokiharju from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for a 2026 fourth-round draft pick. After trading Brandon Carlo, which we're going to talk about, there's an opening on the right side of their blue line, and Jokiharju should be able to come in and eat some minutes for them for the remainder of the season. Moving on now to the next trade, the Ottawa Senators have acquired Fabian Zetterlund along with Tristan Robbins and a fourth-rounder in 2025 from the San Jose Sharks. In exchange, San Jose will receive Zach Ostapchuk, a second-rounder in 2025, and Noah Gregor. I'll be honest, this one surprised me a little bit. I figured with the market how it was, San Jose would have been able to get a much better return than this for Fabian Zetterlund. Maybe they're higher on Zach Ostapchuk than I am. Great deal though for the Senators, in my opinion. Fabian Zetterlund is a very solid middle six winger, scored 24 goals last season. He's got 17 this season in 64 games. Cheap cap hit at just $1.45 million. He's somebody that's going to be able to help Ottawa down the stretch this season in their push for the playoffs, and he's got team control as well. He's an RFA at the end of the season, not a UFA. Especially considering what they gave up to bring him in, I think this is one of the most underrated pickups of the entire trade deadline. We had another minor league swap, this one between the Bruins and the Devils. Again, not really a whole lot to break down when it comes to these kinds of trades, which now brings us to the two big buzzer beaters. These trades came in right at the very end of the trade deadline. We will start off with what in my opinion was the more shocking of the two. The Boston Bruins have traded Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers in exchange for a conditional 2027 second round draft pick. The condition on the draft pick is it becomes a 2028 first rounder if Brad Marchand plays 50% of Florida's playoff games. Marchand is currently injured, so it makes sense to see a condition like this. I can't believe the Bruins actually did it. They traded their captain, Brad Marchand. Not only that, they traded him to a divisional rival in the Florida Panthers. Like I said, the Bruins did not half-ass this retool whatsoever, and I respect them for that. This is the way to do things, especially in a seller's market. I will admit, I was a little bit surprised that the return was only a conditional second, and that's it. I mean, it's likely going to end up being a first-round pick, but even still, Marchand straight up for a first-round draft pick, I think is a great deal for the Florida Panthers. At 36 years old, Marchand is still a legit top 6 winger. He's got 21 goals this season in 61 games. He's an agitator, obviously brings a ton of playoff experience to the table. A potential first round matchup between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers just got a whole lot more interesting. Just imagine the Florida Panthers rolling out a line in the playoffs of Sam Bennett flanked by Matt Tkachuk and Brad Marchand. That very well could be the most annoying line to play against in NHL history. And just as an update here, the condition is a little bit different than I originally said. It's a 2027 second rounder that becomes a 2027 first or 2028 first if Florida wins 2 rounds and Marchand plays 50% of the playoff games. So no guarantee it actually becomes a first. If Florida gets bounced in one of the first 2 rounds, it's only a second, which would be insane considering, again, guys like Beauvillier and Rantanen went for second round picks. Whatever ends up happening, this is a phenomenal deal for the Florida Panthers, a move you make 10 out of 10 times. And actually, quickly before we talk about the other big Boston Bruins trade that came in at the buzzer, we have a smaller trade here between the Leafs and Penguins, which helps set up the Leafs to go out and make the Brandon Carlo trade. Toronto has acquired a 5th round draft pick in 2025 for Connor Timmins and Connor Dewar, so the Pittsburgh Penguins get a couple of Connors and add a little bit of depth up front and on the back end for the remainder of the season. Both players are RFAs at the end of the season, so there's team control there. If either is a good fit, Pittsburgh can choose to keep them around beyond this season. Wouldn't be surprised to see them extend Connor Timmins in the offseason. We know Kyle Dubas loves his guys. And for the Leafs, this was a cap dump to, of course, go set themselves up to acquire Brandon Carlo from the Boston Bruins. So it's not just Brad Marchand they traded to a divisional rival. They traded Carlo to one as well. And the return for Brandon Carlo is very nice for the Boston Bruins. They get Fraser Minton, who's one of the Leafs' better prospects, as well as a first-round pick. Is it surprising to see Boston get a better return for Carlo than Brad Marchand? Yes, but I actually just seen on Twitter that Florida wanted to do right by Brad Marchand, and they only wanted to trade him to the team he wanted to go to, and he picked Florida, which obviously led to them getting not as good of a return as you would think for Marchand. But honestly, I think they made up for that by getting this haul for Brandon Carlo. And for the Leafs, was this a lot to give up? Yes, but I'll say the same thing about this as I did the Bjorkstrand and Gord trade to Tampa and the Nelson trade to the Avalanche. Just because you give up a lot does not make it a bad trade. You have to give to get, and Brandon Carlo fills a huge need for the Maple Leafs. He is a big right shot defensive defenseman, very good penalty killer, and he signed for 2 more seasons after this one, which is massive. I love seeing all these contenders load up and trade away first round draft picks like they mean nothing, because honestly, I do feel like sometimes we overvalue first round picks, especially late first round picks. I mean, just look at Vegas, for example. The only first-round pick they haven't traded in their franchise history is Trevor Connolly, their most recent one. And when you look at all the names of the first-round picks they traded, like the only one that actually turned into a star is Nick Suzuki. This year's trade deadline was absolutely insane, and I think it is going to make for a very fun postseason. So that is going to wrap up today's video, giving you guys my thoughts on every single deal that went down on deadline day. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, especially if your favorite team was involved in any of the big trades that happened today. Sound off down below in the comments. Let me know how you're feeling. If you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, first off, thank you. It was a long one. And secondly, please be sure to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it helps out the videos a ton. And most importantly, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want more NHL content just like this all year round. And I will talk to you all in the next video.